The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, this is Evelyn Madden from Dassault Systèmes. I'm delighted to welcome so many of you on today's webinar, Reformulations for Consumer Packaged Goods. Our featured speaker today is Dale Pixley, Senior Solution Consultant from Biovia Dassault Systèmes. I will take one moment to go through some housekeeping items. Today's webinar will be recorded, so a copy will be available in the coming days. We'll wrap up with some conclusions and take your questions. As you have questions, you can enter them into the chat box and we'll address as many of them as possible at the end of the session. I'll now hand things over to Dale. Thanks. Dale?
Thank you, Evelyn. And I'd just like to let everyone know that you'll see in the chat box there's a link to a video, which is the reformulation video that we put together to show how you can use the Engenuity tools to reformulate a product to really go after the COVID-19 virus, basically creating a new hand sanitizer. Now with that, and I prefer that you watch the video after my presentation, not during, let's get into this. A lot of products out there are formulated products, CPG formulated products. And when I think of CPG, I generally think about things like cosmetics and household products. But there are a number of formulated products out there that can be considered as CPG formulated products. Some of the things that are a little unusual to people is they don't really think of things like tire and rubber formulations as being CPG formulated products, but in fact they are, and the Engenuity formulation tool can and has been used in creating things like rubber compositions. And when you're doing something like a tire, it's interesting because you could have anywhere from 20 to 30 different rubber compositions in the different sections of the tire, things like the tread versus the sidewall versus the plies, things like that. So there's a lot of complexity in any kind of CPG formulated product, and it's unique complexity for every industry. The advantage of Engenuity was it was designed to be a general purpose formulation tool, and we'll talk more about its capabilities later. A little bit about myself before we get going though. I was a formulations chemist for about 18 years, working in cosmetics, household products, and over-the-counter pharmaceuticals. I brought over 300 different products to market. And so I had a very good experience in what was needed by formulation chemists. And just about 18 years ago, I signed on with a small company that would become the Engenuity company. And we were only about, well, let's see, I was employee number 8. So we were only about a dozen employees putting together a formulation solution specifically for the over-the-counter pharmaceutical market and the cosmetic market. My job was to teach our software developers what chemists need in formulation software. And then because we were a small company, my job was also to take what we did in software and bring it out to prospects and show them what we could do to make their lives easier. Today we're going to be talking about reformulation, new and improved. This is what happens when a product's in market and you want to make some changes to it. And we're going to be doing a bit of the 5 W's today. We're going to be talking about what's going to be formulated, when, why you would do it, who is in charge of it, and how is it done. And we're going to be focusing a lot on cash cows. What do we do with these cash cows? You've heard the term, and it's very important to understand what a cash cow is in the CPG market. A great source of information about this, by the way, has been published by the Boston Consulting Group. They have some really good information online that I obviously cribbed to show exactly what a cash cow is, what a star product is, what a dog is, and we'll talk a little bit more about those, and what's going to happen to each of them in the product development life cycle. We're going to talk about the product profitability cycle and what happens when a product goes to market. When is the money spent? Where is it spent? How it's spent, and how it changes over the cycle of the life of the product. We're going to talk pretty much in general terms, though. We're going to talk about sales revenue for income, and for investment, we're really just going to focus on ad spend and R&D effort. And when I say ad spend and R&D effort, I do want to emphasize ad spend is many, many times larger than R&D effort, the cost of R&D effort. But each are very important to the life cycle of a new product. So let's start at the beginning. When a product is just being conceived and going to market, we often talk about this as being the education mode. This is when the company has to teach the consumer about a new product, and this is expensive. You've amortized much of the cost of the R&D effort, but now you have to spend at a high level to educate the consumer. What do they need to be educated about? Well, the most obvious thing is they need to know that this product exists and that it's something different from the prior art and it's superior to the prior art. And why is it superior to the prior art? What makes this product important to the new consumer? This is very expensive. When you're in education mode, you're going to end up at the question mark mode. This is where you have to decide, where do you go from here? You spent your money to educate the consumer. Now you have to evaluate how they've received your message. And it can go either of two ways. Obviously, the ideal endpoint is that you create a star product, something that a consumer desires and will spend money on consistently. But there's always the possibility that you created a dog. And you have to make the decision about what you're going to do when a product is maybe a dog, but maybe a star, something kind of in the middle. You're going to have to make the tough choice about where you're going to put your ad money. The important thing to understand is that 80% of CPD introductions turn out to be dogs. And this is an average across all the different industries. In some industries, it's as high as 95%. And that's okay because that's built into the cost of the development of the material, of the final product, an understanding of what is going to stick with consumers and what isn't. And of course, you have to make the decision of what you're going to do with your dogs. And for anyone who's seen the movie Old Yeller, you know what happens to old dogs. They get taken out behind the woodshed and taken care of. So let's focus on a happier thing. Let's focus on the stars right now. Now, if you have a star, this means it's a product that's in a competitive market, but you're turning profits on it. So you're actually making money on this, but in order to stay relevant in a competitive market, your ad spend has to remain relatively high. And so what you end up with is solid, predictable profitability, but you're constantly feeding the beast. You're constantly spending money on advertisements. This is okay. For many products, it can go through years, decades like this with constant reinvestment. But it's not always the ideal. Sometimes you want to take your star products and see what happens when you reduce investment for greater profitability. Eventually, those products that do succeed get put into harvest mode. Harvest mode is when you have a cash cow. Your investment is relatively low, but consumers go to this product consistently. It dominates the market. It becomes the exemplar for this type of product. And people ask me, what exactly is a good example of a product that could be in harvest mode? And for my American consumers, think of things like Hellmann's mayonnaise, which is the name in mayonnaise. And it's the one that you go to. And you don't have to spend a lot of money to educate the consumer about mayonnaise. You can attempt to broaden your market by teaching people that you can put mayonnaise on a grilled cheese sandwich instead of butter. But there's not a lot of profitability by additional investment in ad spend. You basically just have to maintain minimal awareness. And a product can stay in harvest mode for a long time, but you'll do notice that it starts to tail off after a little while. Because when a product is in harvest mode, not only are you in maximum profitability, you're also in maximum vulnerability. This is when your competitors want a piece of your pie, and they're going to come at you hard with new ideas about how to present a similar product and take over part of your market share. Product vulnerability. You really don't want your cash cows turned to hamburger. And what are the reasons for this happening? Well, oftentimes a competitor can come in with superior technology. And just because they have superior technology doesn't mean they're going to dominate the market. They do recognize that they're fighting against an incumbent with all the momentum of incumbency behind it. But if the technology is sufficiently superior, they can claim a significant part of your market. A competitor can also come in with different brand imagery. So coming in with an all-natural claim, something like that. I know that I've seen different mayonnaises come on the market with things like touting that they use cage-free eggs. Things like that that speaks to a different consumer or speaks differently to the major consumer of the product. A competitor can also come in at a lower price point, and you expect your competitors to come in at lower price points because they're going to get less value for their ad spend. They're probably going to earn less. But if they come in significantly lower, they could start to garner a share of your market, and your cash cows could become hamburger. Now, one of the other major issues, and one that you'll see in the video that I created at the end of this, a change in compliance status that your product is not grandfathered into can also move your cash cow into the hamburger realm. And some products do require continuous consumer education. So even though you're taking and reduced your ad spend, well, the consumer still needs to be reminded about the importance of the product. And what you'll see is a tailing off in the value of your cash cows. And another interesting thing that's been happening in a couple of major products in the US is the target market ages out without replacement consumers. And two big examples of this, although not in the CPG space, are Cadillac cars and Harley-Davidson motorcycles. And the average consumer of a Harley-Davidson now is over 65 years old, trying to recapitulate their youth. And the joke is that the average age of the Cadillac consumer is dead. You have to understand that your market is going to change over time. And if your product doesn't, you're going to eventually die off. And probably the most important thing is that consumers are simply fickle. They change their minds often. And unless you are their go-to product, they may change their mind. They may be tempted away by the new shiny. So why are you going to reformulate a product? Well, there's really two reasons for it: internal motivators and external motivators. And I've listed some of the internal and external motivators here. You might want to do a market refresh. Basically, you want to make sure that your product can say new and improved almost constantly. There's also a reason that's perhaps you went to market, if not too soon, at least not with the optimum product. It's a strategy called Ready, Fire, Aim. I don't want to make fun of this because it's actually a brilliant strategy. Why spend a tremendous amount of R&D effort when 4 out of 5 products will fail in the market? Go out quickly, if not with your best shot, with a good shot. Ready, fire, and then aim. If the product does catch on, if it becomes a star, then it's time to reformulate to optimize the product for the market. Most commonly, what you'll see is you're going to optimize for cost, because if you rush to market, you probably haven't optimized for cost in the beginning. We'll be talking more about line extensions just a little bit. And a geo expansion is an important opportunity for a customer, or for new customers, excuse me. You're going to extend your successful products into new markets. And you have to understand what that means to the new product, to the new consumer. Is it going to mean that I have to change my emotive ingredients? Am I going to have to change some of the way that I present the product? The flavors, colors, fragrances that work in one market, in one region, may not be translatable to a new one. And then you get opportunities like Kit Kat candies in Japan, where there's just a couple of different flavors in the US and Europe, but over 100 flavors in Japan, where that has really taken off. And so you have to recognize your market and reformulate, rebalance your product to meet the expectations of the new consumer. There's also the kind of product that needs a seasonal refresh. This is the kind of thing that has like a spring, fall collection. Imagine things like nail polish or paints and coatings. These are the kinds of things that need to have a certain cadence of intra-yearly development. So you're in basically a constant reformulation mode as you rebalance products to meet the desires of the consumers for something new on a seasonal basis. Now, things that really scare companies are the external motivators. These are the things that can shake you out of the position you're in, out of being fat and happy and back into kind of the fire drill mode. And the big reasons for this is competitive pressure. Somebody does enter the market with superior technology or superior emotive claims and makes a product that starts to eat your lunch. And then probably the most important thing here is the change in regulatory and compliance structure. One of your raw materials is no longer being used. In the video at the end, you can see that. What happens when I created a product around a raw material, but that raw material has been banned. You have to react to these changes, and these are going to happen all over the world. And the changes are not necessarily regulatory as defined by a law in a particular country. It can be done by a non-governmental organization, an NGO, who say that you want to reduce the amount of palm oil or use a sustainable palm oil in your product. Or the company has an internal fiat that says you cannot use paraphenylene diamine in your hair colors. A lot of customers, a lot of our software customers have their own internal mythologies about how their products need to be presented. And if that changes over time, you need to be ready to reformulate. So we're going to talk a little bit about product line extension. And this is one that I worked on, oh gosh, 25 years ago, but it's still relevant today in the story. Herbal Essences was reformulated from a long-time harvest mode product that had a very tiny niche in the organic market. It was kind of like an idea of having an organic consumer. It was a big hit. It quickly became a billion-dollar brand. So naturally what you do is you start to broaden out from that. And the obvious thing to go with a shampoo is a conditioner. So obviously you start to put out a conditioner line with this. And then once that takes hold, you say, well, I can talk about adding hairspray and body wash and other cosmetic goods to this. And eventually you broaden this into an entire lifestyle brand in which you start doing things like not just cosmetic products, but things like taking the herbal scent and adding it to candles. Product line extension is a way of taking your cash cows and broadening their capabilities. Now that does require a lot of ad spend, but it is important because if you become a lifestyle brand, you're pretty much writing your own checks at that point. So, who makes the decision about when a product has to be reformulated? Well, just like anything in CPG, the marketing manager is the god. They're the one that's going to tell you what's going on. And the folks that respond to the marketing manager will be the packaging engineers, the formulation chemists, and the artwork and label designers. They're going to be stepping in tune to what the product manager calls. So what's going to happen? Well, the product manager is going to identify what are the trends in the marketplace. Is my product under pressure to reformulate? What's the consumer telling him? Have they changed what they think about it? Do they want to have a more natural product, a more sustainable product? What's happening out there in the compliance world? Have laws changed? Is it going to affect the sale of my product or the continued sale of my product? And of course, what's new in R&D? What has research developed that could add an additional capability to my product that will keep my competitors at bay? And the product manager is going to put together their product marketing briefs or product marketing specs. And this defines what is going to be created or reformulated. We talk about those product specs as being the targets. And the people that are shooting the arrows are going to be the packaging engineers, the formulation chemists, the artwork and label designers. They're going to be working to meet the goals that were defined by that product marketing spec. Today, we're going to be talking about specifically about the formulation chemists and the tools that they need to make a reformulation possible. Okay, I've told you a little bit about the why of reformulation. How does BioVia Edgenuity support reformulation? Well, there are 6 major capabilities within the software that we tout. Obviously, formula design and management is the basic. This is what every formulation system has to do. It has to handle the same way that a formulator's notebook manages all the information that's needed to bring a product to market. Every version of a formula, the relationships of those versions to previous versions, designs of experiments, test results, all this information has to be managed within the system. You also need to have raw material management. And this becomes important as things like a regulatory change happens. You need to have available to you a breadth of raw materials that you can switch to on the fly. And it would be really nice if there's a simple way that you could do that. Product chemical characteristics and product testing. This is something that is built into the Edgenuity experience. This allows you to set your own internal targets. And when the nice folks in product marketing put together product targets, they're not putting together hard targets. They're saying, I want to have a shampoo that has a great foam. And then it's incumbent upon the formulation chemist to turn that marketing ethereal comment into something that's actually manageable and testable. Okay, I need to have a foam density of this many milliliters per cc, and I need to have a flash foam height of at least this many centimeters from n number of milliliters of shampoo. Those kinds of things have to be decided by the chemist and then worked upon to optimize the formula, test the formula, and then support any of the claims that are made for that formula. And real-time regulatory compliance. This is the kind of thing that is really a differentiator for Edgenuity in the marketplace. So often, regulatory compliance is a hurdle at the end of the process. It's the kind of thing where I will do a ton of work, months of work, and then I send my final formula over to the regulatory team, and they'll recognize that I didn't notice that the particular material I'm using can't be sold in the market that I'm intending to sell the product, and I go back to square one. That's not the way Edgenuity works. Edgenuity has real-time regulatory compliance. So whenever I make a change to a formula, it immediately tells me if this is going to be compliant in the area in which I intend to sell this. We also have material cost analysis tools that allow me to do what-if analysis on a formula and take a deep dive into the ingredient costs, not only on a per material basis, but also on a site basis. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. And ingredient label authoring. It is absolutely imperative that ingredient label authoring be correct. Not only do 80% of products out there fail, but many of them fail because of a simple mistake in the ingredient label. 85% of product recalls is because of a difference between what's in the bottle and what's claimed to be in the bottle on the ingredient label. So it's important to get that correct. So these are the tools that Edgenuity provides for bringing your product to market. Let's talk about one of these tools right now, and that's the ability to do advanced searching. Now, for most users of Edgenuity, they're going to use our basic search, which, like Google, is just a single entry field in which you can type in any kind of formula that you're looking for, and it will find all matching formulas. But sometimes you have to make a much more specific search. A good example for why you need a specific search is I need to find something that all products that are susceptible to a change in raw material. So you've got to match together a couple of different criteria. You have to match your formula metadata, basically information about the formula, where it's made, who made it, is it in production, is it in the laboratory. You have to bring that together with information about the formula itself. What are the ingredients in it? Can I search for a formula based on an ingredient? Can I see how much of that ingredient is in the formula? If I have multiple ingredients, can it search for all of them? And I also want to link that together with performance searching. How does this test out? So if I were to do a very exotic search, like find all shampoo products formulated by me that are currently for sale and contain 2 to 6% zinc oxide with a pH greater than 7.5 and a viscosity less than 10,000 centipoise, I can do that kind of search in Edgenuity. And it's very simple to do because this criterion builder works just the way natural language does. I put these criteria together, I can add new ones, and this all gets put together as an AND search to identify any of the matching products in the company portfolio. I also have the ability to do this advanced search on ingredients, so I can find very specifically the types of ingredients that I'm looking for. Most of the time, you're going to be doing formula optimization, though. Once you've identified your product using our IP mining tools, the next product that you want to take and maybe use some of the technology for to reformulate your existing product, now you're going to need the tools that are built into Edgenuity for doing formula optimization. Probably the most important tools is what we call auto lookup, the ability to type in a name in the formulation grid and find the raw materials that match that name, regardless of the type of name that's used. So in the cosmetic realm, you might use the chemical name or the trade name for a raw material, or the INCI name for the material. There's a lot of different ways that you refer to material. Just think of something like ethanol and all the different ways that you can refer to it. SD alcohol, ETOH, ethyl alcohol, ethanol. Any of these names have to be searched to find the correct material. And Edgenuity automatically does in the grid a search of all synonyms of the name that you enter, and it will find the materials that you're looking for. You can then take a deeper look into those materials by expanding their compositions in the grid. This allows you to see a complex material broken down by its ingredient or its substances, the ingredients that make up the material. And I can affect my formula by saying that I want to deliver a particular amount of this substance. In the video, you'll see that. So I'm going to strongly recommend that after this presentation, you take a look in that video. It's on YouTube. And take a look at it and see how we can use Edgenuity to do that auto lookup and do that breakdown of materials and affect the level of an ingredient based on the percent of a particular substance within it. We also have the ability to do QS, and for those people who are not particularly formulation chemists, QS means sufficient quantity. It's in Latin, though. Basically, this says add an amount of this material sufficient to make up the difference between the sum of all the other materials and 100%. Now, QS is something that just about every formulation system out there does. But Edgenuity understands it at a deeper level because you can QS by weight or volume. You can QS to the batch, or to individual phases within the batch. You can also do QS to a particular final piece size. So if you're making something like a pharmaceutical tablet, you can say QS with a bulking material so that I have a 250 milligram tablet, and it will calculate backwards to how much you have to add to the batch to make a final tablet of 250 milligrams. All of these calculators are built in. There's over 130 different calculators within Ngenuity that allow you to make these calculations. And all of these calculations work both backwards and forwards. So it's very clever that Ngenuity, if you enter a percent, you could see the weight. And if you enter the weight, it will calculate the percent. That's something you can't do in Excel. It's clever that you can do that in Ngenuity, but when you start to look at some of the deeper calculators, all of them work both forwards and backwards. You could say, in my final tablet, deliver 6 milligrams of this particular material, understanding that there are processing losses for 4 of the ingredients in there, and understanding that I have to make 10 million individual tablets, and it will back calculate to tell me how much of that material I have to add to the batch to deliver that amount in my final dosage. We talked a little bit about real-time regulatory compliance checking. This is something that is really a differentiator. We're the first company to go to market with a real-time regulatory system. And it's very simple to use because to the formulator, all that's happening is they're entering the values that they normally work with. But magically behind the scenes, there's a secretary that's keeping an eye on what you're doing. And whenever you add something at too high a level for the market that you intend to sell it, it turns red and tells you that there's a restricted use. And you can go over to the regulatory tab and see what those restrictions are, and you can dig deeper into it, find out about those regulations. But the important thing is you immediately know that the formula that you had put together, that you planned, you could never actually build and take to market. And what this ends up with is you don't make formulas that can't go to market. You don't waste internal resources, time, and material cost on formulas that could never go to market. I have one customer that has recognized about a 10% reduction in scrap just because of the regulatory tool. Once that was put in place at their company, they immediately saw that they were making formulas that could never go anywhere. They would go into the laboratory, into the pilot labs, make these, and dispose of them. Well, there was no reason to make them in the first place because you can't sell them. You never end up making them, saving a huge amount in scrap. We talked a little bit about the cost optimization tools, and this is key. The ability to look at your formula at the cost level. And there are standard costs for raw materials. That's actually in the lower grid that you see here. That's where I'm showing that my cost for goods, the cost to make the formula, the cost to make an individual piece of this formula, and most importantly, the percent cost in formula. What material has the biggest effect on my formula costs? I can see this immediately just by switching to a different view. And the nice thing about Ngenuity is you can have an infinite number of views of a formula. You can line up the calculators that you need to see and save them and recall them at any time. So those layouts become part of your business model. And for all the different types of products that are made in CPG, you're going to have different calculators. And all of those calculators are going to be set up by your formulators in just the way they need to do their work. I was an aerosol chemist for a lot of years, and so I'd have a different layout than somebody who was doing tires. And that's perfectly okay in Ngenuity. Everybody's going to build their own layouts and switch among them freely. We also have the ability to do a multi-site cost comparison. And in this case, I can take multiple formulas and look at them in multiple manufacturing sites to identify where the cheapest manufacturing site is based on cost of goods. This is unique in the industry, and it's a huge advantage to large multinational corporations when they're seeking to identify the most cost-efficient way to do this. And when there's a cost pressure on your product, this might be the answer that you need. oh, look, my competitor is coming in at a lower cost, but if I switch my production to this site, I can meet their cost and still maintain a sufficient market share going forward. And ingredient label authoring. This is something that, as I say, is key to any formulation system, getting the ingredient label right. We talked about how there's three groups that really are involved in reformulation: the package engineers, the formulators, and the artwork and label designers. And as much as I love formulation, I understand that the most important role is the artwork and label role. They're the ones that have the first moment of truth with the consumer. They're going to catch the consumer eye. And so their job is incredibly important. And also important is making sure they have the correct information about the ingredients within your product. For any kind of a CPG organization that has a contract with the consumer that they're going to show the ingredients within the product, it's absolutely critical to get that ingredient label correctly. And because Engenuity has a simple wizard-driven interface, a relatively less skilled employee can go and create a perfectly compliant label. But we also have advanced tools so that a power user can go in and reorganize the ingredients and the names of the ingredients as allowed by law to better represent the product. And all these capabilities are built in out of the box. Okay, I don't want to take up too much of your time today, so let's talk about what we've talked about. We understand that we have cash cows out there. We're making a lot of money on them, but during times of maximum profitability, there are also times of maximum vulnerability. We've talked about our life cycle. We talked about what a star product is, what a cash cow is, and what a dog is. And we've talked about what happens to dogs. We haven't gone too deep into that because it's still early in the morning. We talked about what happens to cash cows when there's competitive pressure. We talked about who's the one who's going to be making the decision. It's going to be the marketing manager, and who's going to support that decision: the formulation chemists, the packaging engineers, the artwork and label designers. The marketing manager is going to set the target. The other groups are going to become the arrows. And we've talked about the great formulation tools that can be used by your company to bring a product to market or to refresh a product when it's under competitive pressure. Okay, I've been tempting you all with the video, and I would like you to, after our question and answer period, take a look at this video on YouTube. The link for it is in the chat window. And so take a look, see how a formula can be taken using some of our advanced formulation tools and ready to fight the COVID vaccine, the COVID virus. Thank you very much. Are there any questions that I can answer now?
Thanks, Dale. We turn to some of the questions now. If you do have any questions, as mentioned, you can enter them into the chat box on the right. I have one here. You did mention emotive ingredients. What do you mean by emotive ingredients?
Oh, I'm sorry I didn't describe this better. An emotive ingredient is the ingredients that you have in your formula that are meant to inspire consumers. So it could be something like, I've got a natural extract, chamomile. I just saw a hand wash recently that had quartz crystals in it. So these are emotive ingredients. They're meant to basically cause an emotional response in the consumer, but the reality is they're not really in your formula at very high percentages. We often used to call them monkey dust percentage, just a little bit in there to make the consumer happy. Now, the important thing about the emotives are that they drive brand imagery and can drive brand loyalty. So although we make fun of them sometimes, they are very critical to brand success.
Okay, I have another one coming through. In Ingenuity, can you manage recipe data too?
Yes, in fact, you can do things like managing the processing instructions. And I talked a little bit about auto lookup, the ability to type in just a couple of letters and find a matching raw material. Well, we also have the ability to do that with processing instructions, where you can just type in heat and it will find all the processing instructions that reference heating a product to make it easier. I'm not Shakespeare. I don't want to spend a lot of time typing, but I do know that there's other Shakespeares in my company that have written really good processing instructions, and I want to access them quickly.
Okay. We have another one here. How do consumers age out of a product?
Well, very simply, sometimes, well, how do I put this politely? When you're young and you've got long flowing hair, you need a shampoo. But as we get a little older, that hair tends to wane, and you're probably not going to need a shampoo so much as a body wash. So that's an example of how a consumer might age out of a particular product.
I just see there is someone's posted that they can't see the link to the YouTube video. Would you be able to repost that, Dale, before we sign out?
I will do that. Let
That is
me,
fantastic.
I think I'm putting it in the chat window, so please check there.
Hang on 1 second and make sure that you can put it to the entire audience. Do you want to try that again once more? Sorry, Dale.
Okay, once more.
Now that should be gone to everybody, I think. We've one last question. How long can products be new and improved?
Well, that's an excellent question too, because there's actually a rule about that. A product can have a new and improved sticker on it for only 6 months. And that's 6 months from its initial product introduction. But they do make allowances for you might have a soft rollout, so it's from its national launch essentially. But after 6 months, you have to take away any kind of new and improved stickering on a product.
Okay. I think that's all we have now. There will be a recording of this video, this webinar, as I mentioned. I'd like to take the opportunity to say thanks to Dale for providing the presentation today and for your time to joining us as well. I think we'll close for now, and I hope you have a great day and stay safe. Thanks. Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Dale.